and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Negotiators from the United States and Iran met in Switzerland for their first round of talks and signing a preliminary peace deal aimed at ending the war. But signs of strain quickly emerged, with U.S. President Donald Trump and Iran's chief negotiator publicly trading warnings. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he will not compromise on preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. The Israeli leader also said the country's forces will remain in what it calls a security zone inside Lebanon to guarantee the safety of the citizens of northern Israel. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has announced a staff reshuffle at the Blue House as he begins his second year in office. A veteran journalist and former CEO of Yonhap News Agency has been named Senior Secretary for Public Relations, while a former prosecutor has been tapped to lead civil affairs and justice policy. The first direct U.S.-Iran talks since last week's ceasefire agreement got underway in Switzerland on Sunday. However, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened fresh military action against Iran, prompting an angry response from Tehran and raising concerns about the fragile peace deal. Our Chung Il-im reports.
U.S. and Iranian officials met on Sunday in Switzerland for the first round of peace talks after signing a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending months of conflict in the Middle East. Led by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and with mediators from Pakistan and Qatar, the meeting is part of efforts to turn an interim ceasefire into a more lasting peace agreement. But even before talks began, Trump threatened to attack Iran if it failed to rein in Hezbollah, the Tehran-backed militant group in Lebanon. In a social media post, Trump warned that Iran would be hit very hard again if the violence continued, while he also told Fox News that he had warned Iranian officials that they won't even make it back to their country if they don't make a deal. Iran responded sharply. Chief negotiator Mohammad Ghalibaf said Washington should watch their words carefully, adding that Iran's armed forces were prepared for confrontation. According to Iranian sources, this rhetoric caused formal sessions in Switzerland to grind to a sudden halt, resulting in a stall in peace talks. However, sources from the U.S. told CNN that negotiations were not over and that the American delegation remained in constant meetings and expected to work through the night with Lebanon believed to be one of the main issues. Iran argues that the United States has failed to uphold commitments to stop Israeli military operations against Hezbollah, while Israel insists its actions are separate from the conflict with Iran. Discussions will also focus on keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and laying the groundwork for technical negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. Chung Il-im, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Israel says it will not back down from its efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, despite ongoing talks between Washington and Tehran in Switzerland. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also vowed to maintain military pressure on Hezbollah and keep Israeli forces in southern Lebanon as long as is necessary. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will not compromise on preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and will continue military pressure on Hezbollah, even as U.S. and Iranian officials hold talks in Switzerland. Speaking at the Jewish News Syndicate International Policy Summit on Sunday, Netanyahu stressed that as long as he's the Prime Minister of Israel, Iran would not have any nuclear weapons.
No matter what happens in the talks, with an agreement, without an agreement, I pledge to you that Iran, as long as I'm Prime Minister, will never have a nuclear weapon.
Netanyahu said Israel's military campaigns against Iran over the past year were launched to eliminate what he described as an immediate existential threat. He argued that without those operations, Iran could already possess nuclear weapons, adding that Israel intends to preserve the gains achieved through its military actions. The Israeli leader also reaffirmed that Israeli forces will remain in a security zone in southern Lebanon for as long as necessary to protect residents in northern Israel from Hezbollah attacks. He stressed that maintaining Israel's security remains a non-negotiable priority. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said troops operating in southern Lebanon face no restrictions when responding to threats. In a statement on Sunday, Katz said the Israeli military remains free to act against any danger to its forces and emphasized that all of the military's achievements in Lebanon are being maintained. His comments came as U.S.-Iran talks got underway in Switzerland, with Tehran reportedly placing the Hezbollah-Israel conflict high on the agenda. Despite the diplomatic efforts, Israeli officials signaled they have no plans to ease military operations against Hezbollah, as troops continue to operate in the security zone in southern Lebanon. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, for more on the talks between the United States and Iran, we're joined today by Dr. Robert Lawrence, Professor of English and Turkic Studies at Dongdak Women's University. Professor Lawrence, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, strain appears to have emerged on the very first day of talks in Switzerland with President Donald Trump and Iranian negotiator publicly trading warnings. What do you make of the latest meeting?
Well, obviously, there's a great deal of tension around the talks. Iran is threatening to walk out because continued violence in Lebanon, claiming that Israel is the aggressor and it violates Article 1 of the MOU. They were also displeased with some of the rhetoric coming from President Trump's social media, and likewise, President Trump was displeased with some of the rhetoric coming from President Pezeshkian and Speaker Kalibov. So, while Vice President Vance is keeping a pretty optimistic tone for the time being, the reality is that there's a situation where both teams ostensibly think that they have the upper hand in the negotiation. The U.S. would probably prefer to get some concrete steps made to show the public that are a little bit less ambiguous than the MOU, which has come under some pretty heavy criticism from all sides domestically. Iran, I think, on the flip side, is kind of determined to shape the narrative and not be rushed into anything. In fact, I think it probably wants to drag out the negotiations because it thinks its leverage will increase as the U.S. midterms get closer. So it's going to focus on and contest every single detail and concentrate on the information space. And this was evident this morning when the Iranian side refused to take part in the photo op. Before today's meeting. So, I don't expect there to be any major breakthroughs in today's talks, or if there are any breakthroughs, then I think the details of those breakthroughs will be contested in the information front, similar to how the 14-point MOU has been contested since it's gone public.
Right, and the most difficult issue in the negotiations is Iran's nuclear program, right? And under the preliminary ceasefire, the 14-point peace deal, Iran will not develop nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief, but Trump has insisted that the deal would ensure that Iran will never buy, develop, or produce a nuclear weapon. And some analysts say that this preliminary deal fails short of that goal. What's your take on this?
I think it depends on how you determine, the utility of the MOU. The first sentence of Article 8 of the MOU says that Iran reaffirms that it will not develop or procure nuclear weapons. Well, that's really nothing more than a reiteration of the promise that they made when they signed the NTP, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that was back in 1970. So, given the non-compliance, the history of non-compliance Iran has with the IAEA, the MOU's critics don't find this to be sufficient, for obvious reasons. However, the rest of Article 8 implies that the details of the nuclear program, such as further enrichment or the stockpiled uranium, are to be dealt with in the negotiations over the next 60 days. So as the MOU stands right now, it changes pretty much nothing, to be honest. But if you look at it as one step of many in a sequential trust-building, kind of framework, then the results of the process will indicate if the president has achieved his goal, well, not the steps. But if we look at it as it is right now, it doesn't really change the discussion at all. It hasn't moved it anywhere.
And another key issue is the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranian military says it's closed the strait again, but the U.S. military says traffic continues to flow. So does this suggest the ceasefire is becoming more fragile?
Well, right, like you said, the two sides are giving very different information about the conditions of traffic through the strait. just a few hours ago, President Trump issued some very strong threats regarding the condition in the Strait. I think that the ceasefire has always been fragile at best. We've repeatedly seen the use of force come into place since the ceasefire has come into place. And if we include the Lebanese front into this discussion, then there's really never been a ceasefire. I think it's a bit of posturing on part of the Iranians. They think they have leverage, and they don't think the U.S. has the political will to re-engage in kinetic operations. Even this morning, Iranian officials openly called President Trump's threats empty and pretty much meaningless. So going into the negotiations, I think that they're trying to show that they have cards, and it was also, likely a response to some of the rhetoric I mentioned before. For the U.S., this could potentially be a deal breaker. Much like the conditions in Lebanon could be a deal breaker for Iran. So, if the ceasefire rests on the implementation of the MOU, then both countries are arguing that the other is already in violation of the agreement, which increases the probability of kinetic military operations resuming.
Right, like you just mentioned, what's happening in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah are complicating the negotiations. How do you see the situation in Lebanon unfolding from here?
I'm not very hopeful in Lebanon right now, to be honest. Both Israel and Hezbollah are arguing that the other initiated the breach in the ceasefire. That was supposed to go into effect on Friday, but since then we've seen deaths on both sides, and fighting has pretty much been constant. Neither of these sides were part to the negotiations, and they're expected to adhere to the deal. And while the U.S. has a great deal of influence in Israel, Israel is its own country, and it has its own domestic political realities that make agreeing to an unpopular idea very complicated. And since October 7th, if there's one thing that the Israeli people have been, in pretty much full agreement is that, they want to combat anything close to their border. So the idea of fighting Hezbollah is not unpopular in Israel, and imposing this ceasefire on them is not been a popular idea in Israel, and they have elections coming up. So, even though the MOU is mentioning Lebanon is also quite ambiguous. In Article 1, it talks about ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon by both nations and their allies. There's a lot to unpack there, and it's very open to interpretation. So both the U.S. and Iran are already crying foul on the activities of the other allies in Lebanon, and there doesn't really seem to be a lot of signs of the situation improving. And, in the last couple of days, we've also seen President Trump talk about maybe getting Syrian forces involved in combating Hezbollah. And I think that'll further complicate the situation. So, unfortunately, like I said before, I'm not very optimistic with Lebanon right now.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Professor Lawrence, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has announced a staff reshuffle at the Blue House for his second year in office. Those include new chief secretaries for public relations and civil affairs. Our Yoon Jung-min reports.
In a key shakeup, President Lee Jae-myung has appointed Song Ki-hong, former CEO of Yonhap News Agency and a veteran journalist, as his new senior secretary for public relations.
For the second year in office, we have agreed upon the need to bolster and broaden communication with the public.
As for civil affairs and justice, former prosecutor Han Chan-sik has been tapped to lead related policies, including the follow-ups to the Lee administration's prosecutorial reform drive.
He is the right person to complete the separation of the powerful institution based on the recently established Serious Crimes Investigation Agency and the Office of Public Prosecution.
Pharmacist turned labor activist Kim Kyung-ja has been named to lead social policy. Army Commander Kang Gun-jak will take on the role of the first Deputy Director of National Security to bolster self-reliant defense capability and political neutrality of uniformed officers. And current Economic Security Secretary Seongju has been promoted and named as the third Deputy Director of National Security, in charge of dealing with increasing global uncertainties. The Chief of Staff noted that the new appointments are aimed at speeding up policy tasks for the president's second year in office. More appointments are expected to follow at the top office, as the post of Secretary for AI and Future Planning remains vacant since the campaigning period for the June 3rd local elections. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The U.S. military's Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Interceptors have been returned to a South Korean military base where they were originally deployed. According to Yonhap News Agency on Sunday, all 6 THAAD missile system launchers have been returned to their base in Seongju, North Gyeongsang Province. The truck-mounted launchers have been moved to Osan Air Base in Pyeongtaek in March, shortly after the outbreak of the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. That sparked speculation that the United States could transfer the anti-ballistic missile defense system interceptors from South Korea to the Middle East to support military operations. However, military sources say the launchers and other key components of the THAAD battery remained in South Korea throughout the period. Dano is a traditional Korean holiday celebrated on the 5th day of the 5th month of the lunar calendar. In Gangneung, one of the country's largest Dano festivals is bringing centuries-old customs to life. Our Shin-soon was there.
Green-tinted water flows through this person's hair, carrying the fresh scent of sweet flag. One by one, people bow their heads, believing each rinse washes away misfortune and welcomes good health. As the bustling Nanjang marketplace fills up, the rhythmic chants of the shamanic rituals could open Dano Day.
Although many of these costumes have faded over time, they're still very much alive here in Gangneung. Behind me, century-old rituals continue.
Embracing this year's theme of leaving worries behind, visitors gain renewed strength from the first-hand enjoyment of traditional games. Cheers erupt from the Sirim wrestling ring as wrestlers grapple for victory, while giant swing sends hanbok-clad riders soaring into the summer sky. Among 72 programs, the festival's community spirit is perhaps best reflected in its surichi rice cakes. Made from rice donated by households despite rising prices, they offer visitors more than a traditional snack, symbolizing a local commitment to preserving the event.
We took a flight through Air Premia from IED in Washington, D.C. to Incheon. We actually came for the festival. So she's half Korean, my wife is full Korean, right? Her parents are from here. I got kind of thrown into the mix of Korean heritage for a while, and it's just cool to actually see it all develop.
Through its long-standing partnership with the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage, the festival also welcomed heritage groups and performers from sister cities and countries, including China and the Philippines.
People from around the world are increasingly interested not only in Korea's traditions, but also in Korea's strong sense of community. Sharing those values helps build deeper cultural connections.
For many visitors, the exchange offers more than a chance to experience Korean traditions, creating a sense of connection that feels surprisingly familiar.
Gangneung is a sister city of Jixing in China, so I was excited to come here. After arriving, I was struck by the warmth and enthusiasm of the people. It really feels like home.
Running until June 22nd, the festival reaches its peak on Dano Day with the Gangneung Sacheon Hapyeongdapgyo play, where torch-bearing villagers cross the bridge recognized as Gangwon's intelligible cultural heritage.
After 20 years of its UNESCO inscription, Gangneung Danoje preserves Korea's living heritage beyond borders, bridging communities from all around the world. Shin-soon, Arirang News, Gangneung.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In Colombia, right-wing candidate Abelardo De La Espriella held a narrow lead in Colombia's presidential runoff on Sunday, taking just under 50% of the vote with nearly 95% of ballots counted. Data from the National Registry Office shows leftist rival Iván Cepeda trailed by roughly 368,000 votes at 48.4%. De La Espriella, who has been endorsed by U.S. President Trump, has promised a tough crackdown on crime, an end to peace talks with armed groups, and a boost to the oil and gas sector. Cepeda vowed to continue the policies of outgoing President Gustavo Petro, including pensions for the poor and a halt to new oil projects. About 400,000 voters cast blank ballots in what is seen as a protest vote. A severe heat wave gripped much of Europe on Sunday, with temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius, prompting health warnings, transport disruption, and the closure of hundreds of schools. The surge arrived on the summer solstice, driven by hot air pushing north from the Sahara. France placed about a third of the country on red alert, banned drinking alcohol in public in some areas, and ordered 845 schools to close Monday. Spain put large areas of the country on high alert, with the heat expected to last until midweek. Italy issued red warnings for 8 cities on Sunday, including Milan and Florence. In Cuba, a celebrated hero of the Cuban Revolution, Ramiro Valdes, has died at the age of 94. President Miguel Diaz-Canel announced his death on Sunday. Valdes fought beside Fidel Castro in the 1953 assault that launched the uprising against the Batista government. He was one of only 12 men to survive the 1956 voyage of the yacht Granma that restarted the insurrection, serving as deputy commander to Che Guevara. After the revolution triumphed in 1959, he headed Cuba's security agency and later held posts including interior minister and vice president. He remained active in government into his 90s, focusing on the island's energy crisis. The 5th installment in Pixar's Toy Story series opened with $160 million in domestic ticket sales and $312 million globally in its opening weekend. The estimates on Sunday make it the biggest debut of the year and a franchise record. Toy Story 5 comes 31 years after the original and has far surpassed the $120 million opening of Toy Story 4 in 2019. The franchise had already grossed more than $3 billion before this release. Directed by Pixar veteran Andrew Stanton, Toy Story 5 features returning voices of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, along with a new song by Taylor Swift.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with the latest weather updates. This week's weather will offer a bit of a break from those intense summer heat we had last week. Temperatures will remain close to seasonal norms, bringing typical late June weather to the country. However, you'll want to keep an umbrella within reach today. Rain is already falling across the southern regions with 10 to 40 millimeters expected. However, Jeju Island will see heavier rain through tomorrow dawn with up to 80 millimeters in the forecast. Meanwhile, central regions in Gyeongsang-Bukdo province will have to watch for passing rain from this morning through the evening. There could be 5 to 40 millimeters of heavy downpours at times, along with thunderstorms. And the capital is forecast to see heavy rain at around 5 p.m. Lastly, checking on today's highs. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 7 degrees Celsius lower than yesterday, getting up to 28 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Daegu much bearable at 24 degrees. Busan and Gwangju will be getting up to 25 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Just beware if you're heading out onto the water. Conditions remain rough.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.